Recently, we witnessed a diplomatic clash between America and European countries at the United Nations. We know that since Trump's arrival, the US and Europe's approach towards Ukraine has diverged. On one hand, Europe still supports Ukraine's sovereignty, while on the other, the US now appears to be taking a pro Russian stance under Trump. Recently, two resolutions have been passed in the United Nations General Assembly. These resolutions condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine and demand the immediate withdrawal of Russian troops. The passing of these resolutions indicates that the majority of UN member states still consider Russia the aggressor. In other words, most UN member states still believe that Russia should be held responsible for the hostilities in Ukraine. The majority of member states voted accordingly. However, during the voting on this resolution, the US stance shocked everyone. Although the US agrees that the war in Ukraine should end and hostilities in Ukraine should cease, now it does not consider Russia an aggressor. That is why the US voted against the resolution backed by European countries, which condemned Russian aggression. However, the resolution was adopted because the majority of UN member states condemned Russian aggression. Still, the US position surprised everyone. This was particularly shocking because just a month ago, under the previous administration, the US was actively urging the entire world to make statements against Russia, isolate Russia, and refrain from purchasing oil from Russia. But after the elections, US policy has suddenly changed completely. Remaining neutral might have been acceptable, but suddenly beginning to openly favor Russia is not being easily accepted by many. If the US had abstained from voting, that would have been understandable. That would have been a different matter. But a country that repeatedly scolded others for taking Russia's side and funding Russia's war is now refusing to recognize Russia as an aggressor. That country is avoiding calling Putin a dictator, but is openly calling Zelensky a dictator. The US is making a deal with Russia while keeping Ukraine and its European allies out of it. The same country that once pressured the world to take a tough stance against Russia is now taking a soft stance towards Russia, surprising all nations. Clearly, with the change in leadership, US policies and priorities have completely shifted. Under Trump, the US is now moving towards improving its relations with Russia, thereby increasing tensions between the US and European countries. Divisions within the Western Bloc are becoming more apparent. Ukraine and America's European allies are completely shocked and disappointed by this policy shift under Trump. Apart from this, there is probably little they can do. 3 years have been passed since the Ukraine war began. Until now, Ukraine had the full support of the US and Europe. But as the war dragged on, the support Ukraine was receiving started to decline. Call it war fatigue or a realignment of interests. Over time, support for Ukraine has definitely decreased. And now, with the US openly extending support to Russia, we will also see a shift in global sentiment. The resolution passed in the UNGA is not binding, but it certainly reveals what the majority of countries in the world think about Ukraine at this time. For now, the passing of the resolution can be considered a small diplomatic victory for Ukraine and its European allies. It indicates that a majority of UN members are still against Russian aggression. However, nothing significant will come out of this, because at the same time we saw that the US voted in favor of Russia while India and China abstained. This means that global powers like the US, India and China did not vote against Russia. So it is true that we are moving towards ending the Ukraine war, and all countries are on the same page regarding this. But at what cost will peace come to Ukraine? What concessions will Ukraine have to make? How should this war be viewed? Countries have different perspectives on these questions. Complex geopolitical positions were evident in the voting, and divisions between countries were clearly visible. The most unexpected development was the US taking a pro-Russia stance. It is clear that in the times to come, the US will improve its relations with Russia, keeping its own interests in mind. This automatically implies that similar shifts will happen in the future as well. We'll continue to see a departure from the US policy of supporting Ukraine. Ukraine's top leadership is already facing criticism from the US. Pressure is being exerted on Ukraine, and tough demands are being placed before it. It would not be surprising if, over time, international condemnation against Russia diminishes. The countries supporting Ukraine gradually turn neutral, and Russia and the US together make significant gains in Ukraine. One can debate who gained more from the Russia-Ukraine war, Russia or the US. But it has become clear who lost. Now, it would not be wrong to say that Ukraine has lost this war.